Good morning. My name is George Cabanas, graduate student at the University of West Florida, Department of English. I am honored to be here today at the invitation of the Planning Committee to enter the conversation on the complicated topic of Twain and God. What I will be discussing with you today is not so much the relationship that Twain had or did not have with God, but to speak to the impact of that relationship. My hope is that by entering this conversation, an additional perspective in answering important questions about the spiritual impacts of Mark Twain's works as an artist, satirist, and literary mentor is formed. I want to first ground this conversation in Twain's difficult personal experiences in the last 10 to 15 years of his life. Along with the other dark period stories, number 44, The Mysterious Stranger, as published in the 1969 edition, was written during a time filled with despair and ever-evolving existential questions. Indeed, almost his entire immediate family died during this period, and bad investments added financial pressure. Looking at Mark Twain as an artist, these traumas make it more plausible that in his art, he turned to making sense of purpose, morality, and eternity. I am ultimately looking to answer the question, what can we learn about our own time in reevaluating some of the approaches to number 44, The Mysterious Stranger? This morning, I will try to provide a fresh perspective. Justin Kaplan noted in Mr. Clemens and Mark Twain that Twain ruminated over the past hardships and could not seem to find a way to unload the burden of guilt. In a short period between 1896 and 1909, just 13 years, Twain lost 2 daughters, his brother, his sister, and of course, his beloved wife, Olivia. One of the inspirations behind the duplicate, Emile, advising August, a family brought love and distributed among many objects and intensifies it, and this engendered wearing cares and anxieties multiplied and broke the heart and shortened life. Contemporary with these losses, Twain experienced significant financial pressure. U.S. foreign policy and domestic social concerns compounded his personal trials. Consequently, we find a man in conflict within and without himself. He struggled with the internal feelings of guilt and external anger about the damned human race. Twain's questions come down to the disposition of his understanding of the moral sense. Within himself, if there was no moral sense, there is no guilt. Without, if there was no moral sense, then humanity would have no reason to build deceptive alliances or conjure institutions to avoid the truth in the name of self-preservation. Indeed, these ideas remain important to us today. Despite being over 100 years apart, we deal with issues that are not unlike those found in Twain's time. We have questions about our identity as a culture and as world citizens. We debate the wisdom of foreign interventions. We are concerned with wealth concentration as well as social morality. There is a meaningful intersection between Twain's waking world and our own. We face the same operations that are part of the moral sense. The moral sense, according to Letters from Earth, is that which separates us from the beasts and supposedly gives us superiority over them. The moral sense also binds us to the consequence of purposeful deception. Imagine if one of those beasts on a road not yielding to the line of cars in front of it. Traffic piling up, horns are blown, patience is lost. Now, if that beast without the moral sense could speak, how infuriating would it be when it replies, "You needing to get to work is of no matter. I do not think about such useless things." If the beast is right in its assessment, then what is causing you such consternation? From the beast's perspective, you are merely deceived by what has been taught to you to be so important. This is certainly one of the lessons of The Mysterious Stranger. August is frequently perturbed because of what he describes as the flightiness of number 44 and his duplicate. But the duplicate is none to impress with the life in the waking self. Why? Because he has become entangled in the consequences of the moral sense. All these things that are deemed important in the waking life are simply empty to the duplicate. We have thus far talked about one part of the moral sense equation, humanity. But if this is a war, there must be at least one more belligerent. I believe it is proper to postulate that Twain saw humanity and God as the combatants in the battlefield of the moral sense. He was not happy with either, and in many ways refused to pick a side, maintaining a transcendentalist-like individuality. However, between the two, one was clearly the oppressed, humanity. Jean Campbell Reisman has recently said that Twain was drawn to the ones he viewed as oppressed, and I agree. Others have observed that towards the end of his life, Twain softened his rhetoric against humanity, specifically because humanity was only doing what it was designed to do. Indeed, in the famous conclusive chapter of The Mysterious Stranger, number 44 declares that God could have created humanity as good children as easily as bad, yet preferred to make bad ones. This sentiment was also considered in Letters from Earth. Therefore, this seems to be an idea on which Twain had started to settle more firmly. How does this war with the moral sense find some resolution? Necessarily, there had to be some conscious thought into this problem, but Twain speaks of limited mentality within the text. So we come to our first barrier that requires a solution. Twain had to find a way to obliterate all distinctions between the real world and the dream world. As I argue later in this presentation, the ultimate answer is that Twain creates a metaconsciousness with God, and in doing so becomes an avatar of God. To get there, I must first describe my use of the term metaconsciousness. Some scholars have noted that it's not difficult to find similarities between Cartesian dualism and Twain's expression of the waking and dream selves. Whereas we are introduced to the so-called mind-body problem in Descartes, we are likewise informed of the anti-monistic speculation in Twain's story. Number 44 argues that in his type of thought, there is no need for material to create. Further, the fact that August comes face to face with his dream self drives home the duality at play in the story. Because of this connection with Descartes, one would expect to find other evidence of rationalism. However, with the transformation of Cartesian dualism into the two separate realities, we seem to have come to a question of intelligence. Two realities, two intelligences, but from a common parent. Twain pulls us into this philosophical loop. Fortunately, we have an explanation in the philosophy of the mind, the conscious and the unconscious. Philip Merlin noted that Freud and Jung equated the unconscious with irrational forces. Then, referring to the work of Plotinus, Merlin concludes intelligence cannot be considered the unconscious or in the unconscious because it is eminently rational. Yet, in The Mysterious Stranger, we are audience to intelligence in consciousness and unconsciousness. I believe the answer to this dilemma is the concept of metaconsciousness. In consciousness, this concept is pretty easy to follow. We have experiences and interactions every day, some of which we can remember and process. Others are more automatic and our recall unreliable. A simple way of saying this is that in the meta-processes, we are aware of the experiences. On the bottom right corner, you can see a picture I took several years ago in Prague. This photograph illustrates metaconsciousness. I am taking a picture of a woman taking a picture of another woman, precisely capturing the act of capturing. Consciousness has experiences. The difference with metaconsciousness is that there is introspection. In the unconscious, If one were to say we have experiences, then of course this is a reference to dreams. Epistemologically speaking, metaconsciousness is gained a priori in so much as it is rational. And in the story's context, it is formed in subjective experience, which Schuyler and Schreiber say is empirically non-demonstrable. That is, attempts to verbalize subjective experiences accurately is difficult. In the unconscious, where most of the times we cannot remember the dream at all, the task is assumably more difficult. In trying to better articulate the interaction of the duality, I have three formless figures. In these formless figures, one is the reality in which the other two, unconsciousness and consciousness, exist. The mysterious stranger, or in the mysterious stranger, August and Emile live in two different realities. When one is conscious, the other is unconscious. I refer to this as complementary states. The areas of overlap is where unconsciousness and consciousness share experience. August and Emile exist in their own realities, but Emile's consciousness is summoned to be active with August's consciousness. Nothing is unconscious. In this way, August can learn what he is otherwise incapable of learning. He forms a higher metaconsciousness and introspection with his duplicate. Many things surprise, shame, infuriate, or worry August. Why? The moral sense. On the other hand, Emile had no such issues. The moral sense had no effect on Emile, but the effects of the moral sense certainly did. When we see August contemplate something impactful, we witness his metaconsciousness. However, that sort of metaconsciousness was limited. Consequently, number 44 gave him another gift, the ability to become invisible. This had a metaphysical purpose as well. When invisible, August is removed from his physical body. In doing so, he was able to experience reality in a more intense way. He was freed from the encumbering flesh, and we see another step towards a higher consciousness. August was now able to gain experiences outside of the waking self, and therefore formed a metaconsciousness in the soul. His introspection was nearly completed, a metaconsciousness with his soul and dream self. Number 44 opined over August's mental limitations. Humanity's mind had no capacity or depth for understanding concepts outside of the moral sense. Twain argues epistemologically through number 44 to arrive at an ontological conclusion. This exchange between number 44 and August is undeniably about the human's limitation concerning knowledge, epistemological. Nonetheless, number 44 establishes the true nature of existence, thought, the ontological. It is here we begin to look for meaning behind all of this. I turn to a fascinating piece of scholarship concerning Moncure Conway, Hinduism, and Mark Twain. In Devil Lore and Avatars, Moncure Conway's likely influence on number 44, The Mysterious Stranger, Duane Utsi finds credible connections between Conway's demonology and the mysterious stranger. As we are bonding together some of the pieces described above, I want to discuss further possible connections, specifically with respect to the Hindu influence. Now, I think it's important to remark that I do not maintain that Twain was either Christian or Hindu, but I do believe Twain was a seeker and a thinker who carried out his ideas in his literature. With this qualification in mind, let us continue. The philosophy found in The Mysterious Stranger has some interesting parallels with Hinduism. First, essence is given a higher standing than the material in both. The Upanishads reads, higher than the senses is the mind, higher than the mind is the intellect, higher than the intellect is the soul, higher than the soul is the unmanifested. We can notice first that the rational is placed higher than the empirical, and above that, intellect. At the very top of the hierarchy is the unmanifested, which appears to be a similar concept as nothing or no existence in the mysterious stranger. August learns that the waking and dream selves are finite. With them is the ability to taste, smell, hear, feel, and see, but these senses are inferior to the mind. The same escalation found in the Upanishads continues in Twain's story. The human mind has a limited mentality, and thus knowledge is also limited. Therefore, the intellect must be superior to the mind. August finds a freer existence in his invisible state, which he eventually realizes is eternal. Finally, at some point, his soul must return to the unmanifested, perhaps the real God. Number 44 explains to August, nothing exists, all is a dream. Certainly, one interpretation could be that number 44 is indicating that August can dream another reality. But I believe it is fruitful to also look at the possibility that the dream referred to in this part is referencing a supreme being. The Hindu god Vishnu sustains the world as he meditates. One explanation of this is that Vishnu's imagination creates the world, and then he enters his own dream. That is a metaconsciousness. Therefore, the nothing in Twain's text is not the absence of all things. It is the source of all things. These parallels may be purely coincidental, but the similarities certainly propose a possible link. Let us now return to the main title of this presentation, Avatar of God. One of the interesting aspects of the Mysterious Strangers is that Twain confesses limited human mentality. Number 44 says that even what humanity does claim to know is an absurdity. If there is mental limitation, and as I have claimed, Twain interjects himself into the story, how do we get past the paradox of an avatar with limited mentality? The answer comes in the duality in which Twain creates and the spiritualized condition. Number 44 clamors about the difficulty of explaining truth to August. August only begins to understand things as he comes face to face with his duplicate, gallivants in invisibility, and partakes in all manner of foreign foods. So in effect, August finds that in imagination and metaconsciousness, he can free himself from the moral sense and draw nearer to nothingness. The ultimate purpose is to allow August, a human living in the waking self, to ascend to a metaconsciousness with the Godhead, that is, to understand and be aware of the ontological truth. Twain himself gains the metaconsciousness in imagining two separate realities that can interact with one another, a surreal window of introspection, if you will. I still have what I believe is a wide gap in explaining the leap between the dualism found in the Mysterious Stranger and the notion that there is a metaconsciousness with God. Metaconsciousness, as explained here, is gain in introspection. If Twain is not an incarnation of God, which I have admitted, then how could a metaconsciousness exist without introspection? Honestly, I was nearing the point of addressing the gap as best as I could in acknowledging that it was an unresolved flaw in my research. However, in a bit of irony, I was given an answer that seems to better address this dilemma. I was in my unconsciousness, that is to say I was sleeping. I began to have a dream. Now, I honestly cannot say what was the content of the dream, but I do remember one very specific experience of the dream. As my irrational processes were off traveling the universe of dreams, I formed a rational thought, awareness that I was having a dream. I realized that I had metaconsciousness with my dream self. Then it dawned on me, if I could remember an experience in my unconsciousness, then would it be possible, in the context of what I have discussed above, to also gain awareness in my soul? And if so, then with awareness in the eternal, it is not a stretch to say there can be awareness in the nothingness. It is in Twain's literary lucid dream we might be able to conclude that he gained the metaconsciousness and thereby achieved the status of avatar of God, escaping the battlefield of the moral sense. His novel came to us in his death, not in his earthly life, achieving metaconsciousness and leaving us these thoughts. Twain has certainly become an avatar of something larger than physical existence, and dare I say, God. He sleeps in eternity, but he visits us as much as we dare in The Mysterious Stranger, with a polemic diplomacy affirming we are a better race to consider the vanities and deceptions of the waking life, to learn to dream better dreams, to perpetually pursue an ever-elevating metaconsciousness. Thank you.